Hey folks, welcome to the Den of Alacrity. I'm Mac. If you're new here, on this channel we like to enthusiastically share and teach each other about our hobbies. If that sounds like something you would be into, why don't you tap that subscribe button and introduce yourself down in the comments. In today's video we're going to talk about D&D. Now, originally this was going to be just one video that took you through the entire character creation process. I know this can be quite challenging for newcomers, and as I was editing it I realised it was going to be probably a half an hour long, and that is too long to be any good to anybody. So I'm going to split it into two parts. You're watching part one right now, where we're going to talk about how I get ideas for characters, how I combine them in interesting ways, and also talk about the bare bones of what your character needs to do in D&D. We'll also look a little bit at how you can build a personality for your character. And in part two, we'll do a deep dive into a character sheet, and I'll show you the choices you need to make when creating your character, and prepare you for your first session. By the end of this video series, you will have 2 to 3 solid character ideas that are pretty well fleshed out, so you can take them to your DM and your party to discuss. I've created part 2 to the toolkit that I introduced in my last video. This one will guide you through the character creation process. There is space on it for you to complete the activities I'm going to talk about over the next couple videos. You can edit it as a PDF or print it out and do it the old-fashioned way. The link is in the description. You don't have to use the worksheet if you don't want to. You can just do it on any piece of paper that you've got or in your head. Either way, by the end of these videos, you'll have some solid ideas for characters. I want to hear about all of your characters, so I'm going to start off by telling you about some of mine. That way I can lead by example and you have no excuse not to leave me a comment at the end of this video. I'm playing 3 characters at the moment, which is the most I've ever played. If I'm honest, I think this is my limit. If I added any more, the lines between D&D and reality would start to blur. First character I play is called Bronny. This is the character sheet I showed you in the last video. He's a dwarf bard. He talks like a pirate despite never having been to sea. He grew up on the streets of a big city and he learned how to defend himself, particularly with swords. To be honest though, in a fight, Bronny is more concerned with entertaining than winning. He uses his skill with a sword to awe onlookers and inspire his teammate. My second character is called Spellsy McGee. Spellsy is a wizard, and he's a particular type of wizard called an onomancer, so he deals with naming magic. Spellsy McGee isn't his actual name, it is a moniker that he goes by to avoid giving his real one out to everybody he meets. He is a turtle, so these are these kind of big humanoid turtle characters. It's an extended race that you can play, and he speaks in a long southern drawl, or at least my best impression of one. Finally, we have Palico. This is my third character, and this is the one I play in my partner Abby's campaign. Palico is a Felis, which is a homebrew race, which are kind of tiny cat people. Think Puss in Boots from Shrek. He is a monk and a cleric, and he works for an order of monks that follow the god Tyr, and act as travelling justices, you know, as judges or peacekeepers or vigilantes if needs be. Hopefully you can see that all these characters are pretty different, and none of them took me very long to come up with. They have, however, grown and evolved as I've played. Finding ideas can be the hardest part. Where do you start? Do you just jump straight into the player's handbook and start looking at races and classes? I mean, you can, but in my experience, that doesn't help you make any decisions. Here's what I do. First, steal. Read, take inspiration. You don't need to reinvent the wheel here. You can and absolutely should be inspired by the things that you've read, watched, or listened to. I find it's a really good way to mine character ideas. Take things that you find interesting, and then try to recreate them in a game. Take some time and note down about 15 characters that you like. There's absolutely no time limit on this, so if it was something you really liked when you were a kid, note it down. If it's something you read recently, you can put it in there as well. You don't have to stick to just characters. You could do a gimmick if you want, you know, like a particular thing has a skull for a head, I don't know, has a pet dragon. Anything that you think would be interesting about a character, but you don't think it's a fully fleshed out character, add it to the list. You want about 15 of these. If you want to pause the video, that's fine, I'll wait. Back. Stage 2 is to mix and match them. Now you can just recreate a single character inside of a D&D campaign, and that can be fun if you're really inspired by a particular single idea. However, I find that the most interesting characters for you to kind of create and explore in a game come from mixing and matching them. I go for about 3 every time. Take my turtle wizard, Spellsy. I love The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss, and so I take huge inspiration from the lead character, Kvoth, in the way that Spellsy does his magic, in the way that he does his naming. I also really like The Dresden Files by Jim Butcher, and so when Spellsy is doing normal magic, because inside the game you can do normal magic, it's kind of inspired by Harry Dresden from The Dresden Files. And then finally, I took inspiration for his demeanour and role in the world from Gandalf the Grey. He's not the kind of wizard that's just going to run in and throw around all of his power. Instead, he kind of takes a watchful and caring tone with the people around him. Hopefully you can see how that works. I just took 3 sources of inspiration, combined them all together, and it's created Spellsy, which is actually a really fun character to explore, play, and kind of improve. And you don't have to stick to this if you don't want to. You can kind of deviate from it. I just think it's a good place to start. So take some time now, and I want you to combine your characters or your gimmicks or whatever you wrote down in that list originally into groups of 3. Don't think you have to stick to, using them only once. If there's one that you're particularly inspired by, try mixing and matching it with different combinations to see something that inspires you. You want about 10 of these. Ideally, it doesn't have to be that many, but that would be great. If you can, it gives you lots of options going through. Before we proceed and you create a bunch of character ideas that are wild and ingenious and totally impractical, I thought it would be good to tell you a little bit what your character actually needs to do in a game of D&D. Huge caveat to all of this. Before you 100% decide on anything about your character, you should consult your DM and your party. They should be a huge part of the character creation process. You don't want to make a character that is just not going to fit into the party that you are joining or into the world that your DM is going to create for you. Caveat out of the way, here's how I like to think of it. Every D&D character needs to be able to handle themselves in a fight and in a conversation. Heroes in World of D&D are not like normal people. They're extraordinary. They're stronger or smarter than the average bear. And so they need to be able to handle themselves in a fight, and they also need to be able to handle being told no. Things to watch out for are characters that are overly annoying or unpersuasive or just unlikable. One, nobody will want to adventure with them, but also they won't be able to get anything out of the characters that you need to talk to. Another thing to avoid is characters that are overly weak, powerless, or have no way of defending themselves. These are huge generalizations, and it can be really fun to break these rules sometimes, but as a new player, I think it's really important you make sure your character idea can kind of handle themselves in both these situations. It'll make it more fun for you until you understand the game more, and then you can start playing with some of the conventions. Look at each of the combinations of characters that you've come up with, and think, how would they handle a giant monster running towards them and their party, or an angry barkeep who refuses to give them the information they need? There are no right answers to these questions. It could be through intimidation, you could run away from the monster, you can handle these anyway. There's only one wrong answer, and that is, they would do nothing. It's all well and good thinking about the choices you'll make as far as mechanically what will your character do, what class will it be, what race will it be. But one of the hardest things I find for new players is thinking about who your character will be. And I have a few tricks for this. And for that, I'm going to turn to the world of personality tests, which we could debate, and it's probably the topic of a whole other video, the validity of such tests. However, when it comes to creating a personality type for a character, I think they're really useful. In particular, I'd like to draw your attention to the 16 personalities quiz. This is a version of the Myers-Briggs test that usually uses 93 questions and then gives you a result that's a combination of 4 letters. Again, that, whether or not these are accurate or they genuinely fit real people, I'm not really worried about that. However, they do give you a good idea of general personality types and starting points for your character. Each of the letters has 2 options, so you can be one or another. Now you can combine these letters into any one of 16 personalities, which is where it gets its name. And you can read about each of the personalities to give you an idea of how your character might act in certain situations. If you can't think of it on this granular level, I definitely recommend heading to the website and reading through the profiles. You can just pick one of them or pick aspects you like from lots of them. It's just a good way to kind of lay out options for personalities. Now you don't have to pick something that's completely opposite to the way you are. Try changing things in some small ways, right? If you are not a very assertive person in life, why don't you try it in D&D? You can kind of put on a mask for a little while, and I think it's one of the best parts about D&D is that sense of escapism of getting to put yourself in the shoes of somebody else. When you sit down for your first session, you're going to have to make one of these. This is a character sheet. This is the official one from Wizards of the Coast that comes with the player's handbook, but there are loads of other versions of this online. There are a few ways you can make one of these, so let's go through your options. You can go for the standard character sheet, which you can get for free online. It's available to download from Wizards of the Coast. If this is your first game and you just want to try it out, the basic rules are available online, so you can look it up and get all your character options laid out for you. However, if you intend to play D&D for a long time, I really recommend you buy the player's handbook. The Player's Handbook is the tome of D&D, especially for a player, and it will give you loads of tips. It's kind of like this video but 1,000 times over. But if this is your first game, I think it's okay to create your first character using the resources available on the internet. You just want to try it out, and the basic rules are available for free, so you can kind of build a really basic character that way, but I would really recommend buying the Player's Handbook if this is the route you want to go down. Option number 2 is to go on to D&D Beyond. So if you just Google D&D Beyond, I'll put a link to it in the description down below. This is an online tool created in conjunction with Wizards of the Coast that lets you manage your character sheet online. You can also buy the Player's Handbook through D&D Beyond so that you have access to all of that content, both to create a character and all the hints and tricks I was talking about earlier. D&D Beyond is what I personally use to manage my characters. They have a great feature where if you're in a campaign with a bunch of friends, you can only pay for one version of the source books, and then you can share it between everyone in the campaign. It makes it much cheaper overall for everybody, and it also just means that you can store your character. Every level up you do is already in there, so I'd really recommend checking out D&D Beyond to have a look. And also when you click on things, you get little explanations. So if you're ever thinking, what does this mean? You can kind of click on it and it'll tell you in a little sidebar, so really, really useful. The third tool that I would recommend is Roll20. Now, we use Roll20 in our campaign to manage a map. It's got like an online map editor where you can put tokens on it so you can kind of see where everybody is on the battlefield. But it also has a character sheet tool inside of it. So you can buy, again, the Player's Handbook through Roll20 and then get access to all of the content that's in there, and you can pull it into your character sheet. But you can also create custom character sheets in there that you have to input the information. So this is kind of another option to the paper D&D sheet. I think it's good to have them stored online because it means you can kind of play with them anywhere, and also it means that the paper that you've written it on doesn't get worn out. I think we've all had a character sheet that's printed out on paper that becomes kind of wafer thin after a few games. That's where we'll end today's session of D&D Learning. Thank you so much for joining me. Hopefully you have some pretty exciting ideas for characters now, and I can't wait for part 2 where we'll dive into some of the choices you'll have to make. I really want to hear about the characters you've made, so please leave me a comment down below. Even if you just include one of your character ideas, that would be great. By the time the next video comes around, I'd like you to have focused in on kind of 3 of those character choices to flesh out a bit more. Anyway, until next time, my beautiful band of internet gorillas, get ready for adventure. Not. Hello, Debbie. You want to be in the video? Yeah? Debbie make a guest appearance on the Den of Alacrity? She doesn't want to. Camera shy.